Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as the sun lights half a tree, the fan whirs, the husband sleeps. Write the poem the way you breathe, with a yawn, a stretch, a crick in the neck, and a sense of ease. Write the poem as she walks uphill, as the dogs bark, as the grass curls its way out of the wet soil. Write the poem while you are still sleepy, before you update a spreadsheet, review a contract, or write an email. Write the same poem every day. Let it be an exercise, a promise, a prayer for who you are and who you'll be that day. Write the same poem every day. Take a breath, hold it in, hope the poem stays. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write about forgetting, write it with clarity. Write it as the sun lights half a tree. Write it as the saw buzzes, as the cars rush, as she walks up the hill. You'll see her again later, still walking. Write it through your yawns, your frustration, as ideas disappear. Write the same poem every day for a year. Write it as a memory of who you wish you were. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as the dogs bark and the breeze tries to turn your page. Write it as your head hurts and the drool dries on your face. Write the same poem every day. Make it a memory of who you were, how stubborn and repetitive. Write the poem until it goes away. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while in a hurry, while making coffee, while sweating, while the world's worries all gather around you again. Write it in the kitchen, on a crumbly countertop, as the bright sun dries the grass. Write it out of duty, of habit. Write the same poem every day. Write it in desperation or dread. Let it wake you up like an alarm going off inside your head. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the husband sleeps, while the sun lights half the trees, while the fan whirs, while the birds chirp, while the neighbor returns home carrying a newspaper, his morning routine. Write it while trash is collected, a banana peel flung into the grass. Write the poem when you have nothing left, no new observations or questions to ask. Write the poem the way ivy climbs a tree, steady, immeasurable, strangling, free. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it hungover and yawning while the husband sleeps, while the skateboarder hurtles downhill. Write it until the day is over and the night. Write it until you write it again. Write the same poem every day. Write it when you don't want to and when you do. Write it until the poem writes you. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as a hummingbird lands so briefly on a branch. Write it as the heat warps the air. Write it as the fan whirs, the husband sleeps. Write it as she walks uphill. Write the same poem every day. Write it as a practice, as a profile of your morning and your sleepy brain. Write the poem and write it again. Write the poem till it's empty, vanished, dry. Write the poem until you know why. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it as the husband stirs awake, as the fan whirs, as the sun lights half a tree. Write it as your own eyes blink unwillingly awake. Write the poem as a mistake. Write it as an afterthought or error. Write it distracted, tired, unfeelingly. Write the poem without pity, compassion, mercy. Write the poem till the meaning is gone. Write the poem and move on. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it while the sky is pink after sleeping through your alarm. Write the poem in a hurry, out of frustration or fear. Write the poem until it disappears. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it in unfinished, impossible, angry. Write it without regard for quality, and secretly hope it's good anyway. Write it as a form of avoidance or prayer. Write the poem until there's something there. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it for your past self, her dreams and ambition, her pretensions to glory. Write it for a future you as a record, a time capsule, a snapshot, a story of so many mornings putting pen to paper. I guess they call this writing. So write the poem in spite of yourself. Write the same poem every day, with focus but without meaning, like a basketball player dribbles a ball. Write the poem for no reason at all. Write the same poem every day, or don't. Skip a day because you're busy, you're doing yoga, you're out of town. Write it in the morning, write it from memory, more as a memory of a task than a text, more as a memory you're making than one you've made, more as a practice than a poem. Write the poem the same as the way you jog around the park, past the same trees, that still must change slightly every day, even if you don't see it. Write the poem, or be it. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the husband stirs awake in the next room, while 3 people walk by, 2 going uphill, 1 going down, all wearing the same shoes. Write the poem about nothing, like always. Write the poem about the chirp of the birds, the soft whir of cars on a wet road. Write the poem about your own ambition and frustration, stops and starts and hesitation. Write the same poem every day. Write it like waking up, slow coffee for the brain. Tomorrow, write the poem again. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it sitting outside, hearing the leaves rustle, while a friend meditates a few yards away. Write it while your coffee cools and your eggs do too. Write it for no reason except that you always do. Write the poem until it becomes you. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Even after you've skipped a day, neglected the task, maybe even forgotten one morning to write a poem, because you were hungover or too tired or around too many friends, oh well. Write the poem anyway, a day late and $1 short, like a glass of champagne left out overnight, all the sparkle gone. Writing the same poem every day, plodding, arrhythmic, toneless. Write the poem unless you don't. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory, write it while the coffee burbles, while the husband sleeps, while you sit on a couch in Tahoe, getting ready to ski. Write it through your yawns while your mother bestirs herself while staring at the artificial fire. Write the same poem every day without worrying about it being the same or a poem. Write it as a record, as a reworking, something that becomes smoother over time, or maybe sharpens. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it before checking the news in a state of suspended information. Anyone could have won and no one has won. Write it while making coffee, while cleaning the kitchen. Write it as a poem of quiet domesticity. Write the poem because it's cold outside, because you're hibernating. Write the poem through your yawns, wanting to crawl back to bed, not wanting to know, not wanting a result so final sounding, so conclusive, not wanting history to move forward and not wanting to move forward either. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it as the husband makes coffee, as the clouds hang heavy, gray. Write it after spending a long time away. Return to the poem out of comfort, out of fear. Write the poem so you know you're here. Make it your testimony, this simple list of days. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel terrified, disbelieving, at a loss in the face of immensity here in my small corner of the world. Write the poem as the humblest contribution, one piece of a vast quilt. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it as the husband sleeps, as the sky brightens, pink, orange, blue. Write it for the cause of the crows and the trees, harsh and constant, a sound of warning or reunion. Write it as you wake up and reality settles in around you, familiar and disturbing. All the sunny, spooky normalcy of a small town in a horror film. Who are you today, the victim or the killer? Sip your coffee and put your questions aside. Then stay home. Wash your hands. Hope for a third way. Write the poem and face the day. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it while the husband reads, the coffee brews, the rain pauses. Write it looking at the gray sky. The weather's always too good or too on the nose these days. Before watering your plants, write it sitting inside, looking outside. Trying to look past the trees, the hills, the houses, all the way past the ocean to the far horizon so you can see what it is that's coming. You can't figure out how to release all this worry. Write the poem as an ever-expanding container for your unease. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning. Write it from memory. Write it as it rains, steady and gentle, as the husband clears his throat in the next room, as the world shrinks in every way possible, as we try to count the losses. How long until it touches you? Not long, most likely. Write the poem like one more drop of rain, tiny and uncountable, fleeting and still, part of a larger nourishing. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the husband sleeps, before reading the news, while the rain dries on the sidewalk. Write it while your eyes itch, dry with allergies. Write the poem as an empty vessel. You're the faucet, the poem's water, the one flows through the other, sure. Write the poem as liquid as hope, slippery, ungraspable. Hope is water, or a snake. Slippery, ungraspable. Is the poem refreshment or venom? Hope is the thing with fangs. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Skip a few days, guiltless and distracted. What feels better, to cling to a routine or to abandon it? The answer to this, like any other question, now changes daily. Are you the beach or are you the tide? And anyway, how do you stop the moon from pulling on you? Our relationships to each other, our scaffolds of power and control, what a mess, all of it. Write the same poem every day, a blueprint to guide you through the wreckage of the soul. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the clouds hang low and blue-gray, while the husband sleeps, while you try to muster the energy to go for a run. Write it while the tennis courts are closed, basketball too, while all our options narrow and remove. Write it through your yawns as your eyes itch and tear. Write the same poem, you said, every day for a year. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the birds chirp and tweet, while the sky is gray and flat, while the coffee cools. Write the poem as a kind of stretch or warm-up. Write it as an unwillingness to leap immediately into working. Write it as a way to cling to another part of yourself that doesn't organize spreadsheets, doesn't forecast scenarios, doesn't motivate anything. A poem isn't a prediction or a prescription either. It cannot sort or solve, it can only offer. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the husband sleeps, the coffee brews. Write it while the office plants you've brought home recover from neglect, strengthen, grow. Write it while people walk and bike up and down the hill, masks covering their noses and mouths. Write the poem as you clear your still sore throat, as you shake off last night's dreams, as you form your first thoughts of the day. What are they? Awareness of the body, dread of the week to come, a sense of imperfect readiness. Then, write the poem as preparation to face the enemy you know and the one you can't imagine. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as a raven swoops by, as the sun brightens and flattens everything, as you try to scrape off all the shame you accumulated yesterday. Your thoughts get pulled away from you in different directions. You can almost see it. Look, the last bit of fog is being burned off the distant hills. Sometimes it hurts to change your state, and sometimes it just hurts and nothing changes. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while the coffee cools, while the husband types, while the fog curls around the trees. After a good night's sleep. After the husband asks, "Can I tell you something in the news?" and replying, "Will it make me sad?" Write the poem before reading the news or anything else, really. A brief break, an in-between internal. Sometimes a poem moves you. This one is a pause. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it after waking up cheerful for the first time in weeks. Write it while the husband sleeps, while the park workers saw down a tree. Write it while the sun burns through the fog, while you feel a breeze. You brought some office plants back from the dead, and now the apartment is very green indeed. Write the same poem every day. Sometimes it pokes and plods, sometimes it skips, sometimes it sings. How brief our lives are and how long our days. Write the poem in spite of everything. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Use those words to give yourself a running start, a push, a plank to dive off of, and try to give yourself a break for all the days you didn't, the days you collapsed at the sound of the starting gun, the days you had to be shoved or refused to dip your toe in the water. We're dealing with new forms of exhaustion now, new assaults. This is the new siege. We say this is a marathon, not a sprint. And this isn't a moment, it's a movement, but it feels like all of the above. So try to give yourself a break or a breath or some grace. Maybe that's it. Just some grace amidst this rank horror and inelegance. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as the coffee cools to a drinkable temperature and you tentatively flex this muscle. See if it's sore. Look at yourself. You have been given everything, even the sunshine, even another day. All those we've lost should be here too, breathing deeply, drinking coffee, trying to organize their thoughts for the day. It's as though a chunk of the world was broken off and it's no longer round. How can our orbit not be altered by this loss, this loss, this loss? Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as a warning or a protective spell. Write it as a crutch, a stick that helps you hobble uphill. Write it as a lifeline thrown from an unknown boat. Write it as buoyancy, a way to float when everything else is sinking. Grind the coffee, knead the bread. Write the poem as a reason to get out of bed. Maybe that's enough work for a poem to do. Dr. Seuss rhymes. The rest of the work is up to you. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as you yawn awake, as a breeze pushes through the tree. Write it while the husband sleeps, so much unchanged. Write it while trying to spend less time online, less time on Twitter, less time having it all come at you. No new thought here, just a need to look at the sky. To look out, to look at anything that's not designed to give you information, to just let the eyes look and see. Write the same poem every day, in the morning from memory, etc. Maybe it's not a poem, but at least you're out of bed and not scrolling Twitter. Went to bed sad, woke up sad, sad all week. Nothing special to say about it really, the world is a mess, etc. Maybe I'll have some insights or a nice turn of phrase another day, but right now I mostly feel a lack of meaning and utility, just dragging myself through the day. A hawk flew by, how beautiful. Write the same poem every day, write it in the morning, write it from memory, write it when everything you do is still not enough. While the fog settles in, write it while the coffee cools, while the husband sleeps, while the crows bark at one another from their branches. Write it while your mind drifts, while the alarm clock beeps as the husband stirs. Another week ahead. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as a rhythm to drag you out of sleep, a soft percussion that overcomes the softer drumming of your headache. Write it as an invitation to dance, the kind you receive at the end of a long night of dancing after you've kicked off your shoes and are sitting out back fanning yourself, your sweat drying, the kind of invitation you'd reply to with a laugh, but then you'd hear the beat of the music and throw up your hands. Fine, all right, one more song. That near delirious happiness on the other side of joyful exhaustion, wouldn't that be a beautiful way to begin this foggy morning? Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it as the fog settles in thick, as the coffee cools, as the husband sleeps. Write the poem in your messy apartment. Didn't we just clean it? With so much to put away or put elsewhere. Write it when you're too sleepy to go for a run, when you've just started menstruating, startled in the morning by the brightness of the red. Write it when you have too much to do, so always. When it doesn't feel important, even though you know it's the only piece of rope connecting you to rescue as you drift further out and the waves rise, blocking your view of the boat. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory. Write it while listening to the pop of tennis balls, batted back and forth across the street. Write it while the husband sleeps, the small birds cheep while the foghorn lows in the distance. Write the poem as your puniest, most personal resistance. A kind of unbendingness or insistence that things might not always be as they are. Write the poem as a form of protection or self-defense. Write the poem as a way of making sense. Write the same poem every day. Write the poem as self and shadow, a constant echo that shrinks and grows. Write the poem and let it go. Poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory, write it as the fog blankets the world, muffling the sounds and diffusing the light. Write it as you yawn and blink awake, you know what's on your mind. Navigation. Trying not just to arrive at a destination, but to get there unscathed. So write the poem as a compass, write the poem as a shield, write the poem as a fortress too, but make it porous, pregnable. Vulnerability is more necessary than armor right now. Write the same poem every day as a heartbeat steady, steady, even as it quickens with effort, even as it covers you in blood. Some days you can't write the same poem. Most days already you didn't, so then today is another. So many days skipped because you couldn't write the same poem or just couldn't write. Because the morning was a force pressing back against you, because every memory picked a scab or pressed a bruise, you hit snooze on your alarm, slept in, spent your whole day in prose. Today, a poem and a funeral. We will try to stream our love and hope that it's enough, and no, it won't be. Write the same poem every day. Write it in the morning, write it from memory, write it as a runway, a form of launching into the day ahead, which implies acceleration, yes, and destination too. So write it as a slingshot, write it as a catapult, write it as any kind of force that gets you off the ground. Write it as if it were external to you, as if it wasn't your phantom limb or second breath, a shadowy pair of lungs filling with a different, denser air. Write the same poem every day. Write it as a way to see it, even though it's already there.